Hello, beautiful people. How are all of you doing today on this fine, pleasant, slightly cloudy, but not in a gray, sad-looking way, Tuesday afternoon? How do you do, chat? I went to bed really late because I wasn't able to fall asleep. Or I guess rather I tried to go to bed early and then I didn't fall asleep and then I got up because I was bored. Hello! How do you do? Oh. Oops. Accidental Balatro. That's crazy, dude. My hair actually looks so bad. It's fine. Oh my, wait, okay. This is awful, actually. What the fuck? Oh no. It's, wait, okay. You know what? I give up. I give up. I give up. Alright. Oh, I get an exercise redeem.
If there's nothing better to do, we could go foraging for ingredients.
Alright. Anyways, chat. It is what it is.
I can't decide whether pyro slimes taste better with salt and pepper or garlic and herbs.
By the way, can we take a second to appreciate how stupid of an idle voice line that is? What do you mean salt and pepper or garlic and herbs? Why would you season anything with garlic and herbs but no salt? What? Wear your glasses? I wonder how I'd look with glasses and a hat.
Is there time for a quick snack? I'll whip one up in no time. I can't decide whether pyro slimes taste better with salt and pepper.
Underground Canadian rapper vibe. Okay, dude. Game is Chinese, and in a lot of dishes, the base is garlic, ginger, scallions with soy sauce. With soy sauce! Exactly! She's talking about... I'm not... The soy sauce part is important! It is! Okay? It's really important. Arguably the most important part, actually. Okay, I'm poor right now, right? How poor am I? I did do a bit of Lantern Rite, so I don't think I'm as poor as I used to be. I'm back to 1.5 million Mora. So we're fine. We don't need to farm Mora today. But I do want to farm
have a special place
at least 60 resins worth of one of these two things. Hello. Girl is majoring in white people cuisine. Even white people know that salt is important in cooking, okay? Like, if even white people know it, then there's something, yeah. Alright, I don't know what talents I want to farm for, though. That's kind of a problem. Ave? No. Okay, whose talents do I actually care about that isn't already, like, pretty much maxed out? I guess Singto, but, like, I like keeping him like this, because it's funny. I could actually level Chivalry's skill, get a little bit more healing. Oh, I already have a bunch of those. How many blues do I have? Oh, I have a bunch of those as well. Okay, I guess I don't need to farm these then. Fuck. I use this event to level up the level 1 favs I have. Yeah, maybe I should level this fav, actually. That's a good take. I guess. I don't really want to, though. Who else could I work on? What about Lanyan books? You need what? 4, then 6? No. 4, then 9? No. 4, 6, 12? No. How many do you need for level 8? 4, 8, 12? Okay. Which means if I get lucky on Singtoprox, I already have enough. Although, I would also want to level this. I suppose. Okay, fine. Diligence. Let's do diligence. Due diligence. Get it? Sorry. I wanna play more Shangling because of the skin.
Want me to come along?
Isn't this the enemies with power resistance? Oh well.
Everybody stand back!
Time to go.
Let's light it!
I guess it doesn't matter because they have 3 HP. 1.0 domains, yeah. I suppose that is a 1.0 domain, huh?
Event teamwork is dreamwork! Bring it! Get them!
Cloud's hot. The birds call.
I want to play more Shangling. Words dreamed up by the utterly deranged. Okay, dude, that's mean. That's rude. I'm not deranged. I'm Zajef. Who's this deranged guy you're talking about? Are you cheating on me with him? Hmm? Is that what you're doing, chat? I understand. I know. I get how it is. Can you return the cam to the other corner? Sure. I don't really mind. Chat, are caps supposed to make your head hurt? I don't think so. Oh well. I guess I'm just built different.
One with nature.
Get them!
Wind strike.
I know nobody gives a shit, but I got Kanoris in duel today, and I wanted to tell somebody. Oh, congrats. You know who else is getting Kanoris on duel today? Me. I'm gonna get it right now. VOD watchers skip 12 days, true. Fuck. I did not get Canoe. Fuck. I think that might have been my best attempt so far. Yeah. Yeah, 22. 22 off. If you're canoe farming, why not just reset? Because I'm not actually canoe farming. I'm not good enough to canoe it yet. I think this is the longest I've kept my combo from the start. We got a few good already, though. Fuck. Shouldn't have yapped. I think this was my best one. Oh my god, that was a lot better. Only 14 wrong. Ooh. Ooh. Cap buff, true. I'll do it until my attempt is worse than the previous attempt. So I need to get less than 14 to keep going. That was a bad start. This is gonna be the last one, I think. Pretty sure I've already got like 10 misses or like 10 wrongs. I need to lock in. That was a ass. That part's the hardest part of it. But it's already Jover, so I don't need to lock in anymore. Which means I can yap all I want. And now, just because it doesn't matter if I fuck up anymore, I'm gonna be able to yap without making a mistake. That's just always how it is, man. Fucking hell. Fucking hell, dude. Okay, whatever. Fucking hell, dude. A boba. Last one. No, I said I was gonna do it until I got a worse performance than the last one, and that's what I'm doing. He's reformed, yes. Reformed. The hat changed him. It did. It did.
Into the wind. Fallen leaves adorn my. Off we go.
That channeling skin is so cute, but I can't be asked to do Lantern Rite. Yeah, that's honestly like, yeah, that's an aware moment. That do be how it is. Doing this Lantern Rite isn't too bad. Yeah, like if you mash through the first quest, the like gameplay events are really not that bad.
Teamwork is dreamwork. Let's light it up.
Last Lantern Rite quest was so good. Well, we'll get around to doing it soon. So I don't know if we'll do it today. There's a video I want to record today. I have been struck with inspiration this morning. What video? I want to make a video going over each carry and their best teams. And not just their best teams, but also like other good teams you can use with them and the supports they work well with.
Teamwork is dreamwork. You're toast. Nice and spicy.
Wind strike.
Wow.
Everybody stand back. Let's light it up.
You gonna like join us or what? Drinking every time Bennett, Chilone, and Sitlali is mentioned. True. Did you color your stash? It looks different. It's just shadows and lighting. But my mustache hairs are like a little bit borderline blonde. I was blonde when I was younger. I guess it still kind of shows a little. Just a tiny little bit. What? It's true. I'll find a picture of baby Zajef.
Is there time for a quick snack? I'll whip one up in no time.
We can see the evolution of my hair. I'll also get some pictures of child and young teenagers Zajef. All right. I've got an assortment of pictures. So this, me when I was like, I don't know, 2. And you can see my hair, pretty damn blonde.
If there's nothing better to do, we could go.
Now, this is me when I still had my sense of whimsy. I was beginning to lose my sense of whimsy, but you can see my sense of whimsy left me with the blonde color of my hair. You know, the blonde is starting to fade away. Dude, I've got Alhaitham legs here. What the fuck?
I can't decide whether pyro
Yeah.
slimes taste better with salt
And
and
then it was
pepper or
gone.
garlic and herbs.
This is early high school Zajef. What a photo, that last one. I mean, I have a lot of really good pictures of me. Because my dad was a great photographer. I can find some of the other pictures that are like actually good pictures. There's a bunch. Especially the later ones. Like, this goes pretty fucking hard, you know? The lighting is crazy. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is. This one, the background looks better, but my face looks fucking stupid. From the same day, I think. There's also this one that's like actually a fucking banger. Oh shit, yeah. This is actually a fucking banger pick. For sure. There's also a bunch of other pictures that are good, but they feature other people, and I don't want to fucking show my family without asking them, you know? So I don't want to show them.
If there's nothing better to do, we could go foraging for ingredients.
You show the prom pic? Sure. Special Agent Zajef.
Is there time for a quick snack? I'll whip one up in no time.
Agent 77. Soldier 77. True. Alright. You look handsome today, thank you. You look green. 5 days. You still have those glasses? I don't think so. I think I broke them. I don't think they'd suit my face with a beard, though. They're too, like, empty at the bottom. And thick at the top. I don't think it would suit well with a beard. Maybe it just means maybe it just means I do need to shave. Maybe that's the play. I wonder. Mondstadt. Oh, where? What are your thoughts on the tariff wars as a Canadian? I mean, I'm sure they're the same as pretty much literally everyone else.
Add Astra. Thank you for complete. Add Astra.
Trump is a fucking idiot. I have a new avatar. Alright, Lanyan. Who else? Oh, fuck! Wait. Is it time to say goodbye to Arlecchino, chat? It might be. It might be. Fuck. No, I don't think so. Yeah, the hat isn't even, like, easy to see. I'm sorry. Arlecchino, you're still gonna be here. I'm sorry, Chanling. You know what I should do though? I should add name card showcases for the characters I like. That's what I should do. Is that from the... Yeah, that's the fucking... From the Vagabond event, dude. Damn. What is that? Big news. Okay, is this supposed to be a One Piece reference? A press organization, like with the emblem of a bird, and they call it Big News. Like at that point, I feel like I think it is supposed to be a One Piece reference. Pelicans are just delivery birds and Fisher. I mean, sure, but like, it's not just about the bird. It's like there's too many things, you know? It's the fact that they call it Big News. You show me some Arlecchino and Mualani on Vape VV setups. Sure. Do you have C1 or not? Whether or not you have C1 actually matters a lot for Lanyan. Wait, also, I want to double check something. If you EN1 on Lanyan with Yelan, does your normal attack hit before your Yelan thing or not? I haven't actually tested that.
This will be a
No energy? Fuck.
Here comes the catch. Going in. Up and away.
I think we got a Pyro Swirl there, right? Right?
Let's light it up.
That kind of looked like a Pyro. Did my E miss? Is it possible with C6 Candace? It should be really easy with C6 Candace. Unless I'm mistaken.
stay close.
there, though. The setup is easy, though. You just need to dash cancel the charge attack. I forgot to do a normal attack. I'm an idiot, chat. You can call me Idiot Jeff. Because I'm an idiot.
Let's light it up. Do your worst. Everybody stand. Flee. Hear my breath.
Up and away!
Yeah. Very easy to do. When you're not an idiot, very easy to do. Wait, this is actually really fucking good, though. That's, like, actually a really big deal. But I guess, right, never mind. This is one of the teams where the fact that TTDS has a 20-second cooldown means that Arlecchino only gets it every other rotation. That's unfortunate. Wait, I'm an idiot. Yeah, sure. I wish I could use this, man. Maybe I should go change my Farina build. So I can use that goblet, because it's so good. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. Alright, it's because this is really good. Five, six. Ugh. Oh. I'll just do this, whatever, I don't care. And I can use this. Probably. Use another one if I want to. This one. That lets me... And this. That lets me use that goblet on her. It's a pretty big deal. And for this, I want crit radiar. I suppose I can yoink this thing. I do want emblem. Thing. I want something with crit rate. Yeah. Should be good enough. Where is Lanyan? Alright, now the problem is that AoE VV setups with Candace are kind of rough. Might as well put an actual second side team. Did I just... I don't want to talk about it. Well, whatever, I guess.
Here, let them fly.
Whatever, I guess. I just can't be bothered. Alright, and then this part is like kind of beds, right? Please. Okay.
Up and away.
Laid bare. Let's light it up. I'm going in. Please, grant us your blessing.
Butterfly.
Okay.
Rise, please. Light up the blazing sun. Light it up.
Absorption test.
Show no mercy. Eat Laline. Eat Papa. Get pyroclastic surge. Incinerate. Fulcrum. Bring it.
Animal test 63.
Fulfill our pact.
Oops.
Suffer the wrath of
Oh. I didn't need to ult. I killed it with a skill. That's funny. Candace useful I mean, you think she wasn't being useful?
Staring into my eyes is ill-advised. I can't promise you.
Corn, do you like Candace over Yelan? Candace allows for slightly shorter rotations. Her buff is front-loaded. And her app is AoE. Anyways, chat. Let's start thinking about how I want to format this video. Is my hair still fucked if I take off the hat? I mean, kinda, but it's not that bad. It doesn't show too much if I hide it behind the headphones. Alright, we're vibing. We're fine. I don't know, chat. I don't know if we could actually make a good video out of this. There are too many carries now. Yeah, there kind of are. You know what? Fuck it. Gonna be a long video. It is what it is. Everyone say hi to YouTube. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome. Hi. To a video about team building. I want to make a video where I cover most of the current meta carries teams and which teams you can play them in, how reliant they are on specific supports, and all of that. The main reason why I want to make a video like this is because they announced a Farina rerun coming soon, and Farina's a character who's fairly strong, but a pretty sizable portion of what she provides is very reliant on what your team is, right? Not only does she, like, directly, very obviously, warp your team building towards needing a healer in order to stack her fanfare, she's also a unit that, by nature of being an off-field hydro unit, can enable certain teams through reactions. And I want to go through a bunch of the carries and talk about how reliant they are on any given archetype. Because I think a lot of people not necessarily overrate Farina, but overrate like the carries that are good with Farina's importance on being paired with her in a lot of situations. And so I want to talk about, I'll also talk about the Farina teams, obviously, but I want to talk about all the different archetypes you can make, to try to help you figure out the sort of teams you can do without feeling like you have to go for a unit if you don't like them. So let's get right into it. And we're gonna start with the three carries that are pretty much universally agreed to be the strongest three carries at the moment, which are Neuvillette, Arlecchino, and Mawika. So starting with Neuvillette, and Neuvillette is probably the character who you could argue is the most reliant on Farina, but also not. So Farina has really good synergy with Neuvillette because, one, Neuvillette will always overheal himself whenever he starts a charge attack unless you got hit a lot, which is going to proc Farina's passive that heals the whole team a little bit whenever you overheal very reliably. Two, Neuvillette both heals and consumes his own HP a lot, which means he's going to stack fanfare a lot. Three, Neuvillette is an HP scaling hydro unit, so buffs that buff his damage will almost always also buff Farina's damage. And so they have very good synergy together, but Neuvillette has a passive that relies on triggering hydro-related reactions, and in order to max it out, you need 3 reactions, which, by default, is 3 elements other than hydro on your team. The thing is, his synergy with Farina is so good that even with that passive, his best teams tend to be with Farina. That being said, we're getting more and more support options that work well with Neuvillette. More and more supports that aren't like necessarily designed to work with attack scalers, that give Neuvillette more options. And I'd say that now he's a lot less reliant on Farina. I'd say his best team still use Farina, but you can get away without her. The main thing about Neuvillette is that because he's so easy to play, and because his AoE is so good, if your Neuvillette's build is strong enough that it can clear the content, you'll clear even if you close your eyes and you don't know what you're doing, pretty much. And because of that, the DPS requirements for his teams are a little bit lower, because you reach the theoretical you reach closer to the theoretical DPS than you do on other teams. And so if you play an Neuvillette team that isn't the best Neuvillette team, you'll very often still be able to clear content. And then on top of that, when content counters Neuvillette, it generally also counters Farina, and so his best teams in content that counters him tend to be teams that don't use Farina. And in content that doesn't counter him, you don't need Farina to clear it. And so while Farina is definitely Neuvillette's best teammate, I don't think she's anywhere near necessary for him. Other teams that you can do with him include teams where you just try to capitalize on only his damage, right? So you can use a combination of res shredders and damage percent buffers, right? You can use Shilonen, Kazuha, Citlali, Zhongli. You can use characters that do some personal damage themselves without needing too much upkeep, right? Characters like Albedo, Chiori, Fischl. Or you can use characters that enable Neuvillette to do some reactions, like Xiangling. When you look at Neuvillette speedruns, you'll often see Xiangling teams being pretty high because they're strong. They're just harder to play. In any case, you have a lot of options for your team building with Neuvillette. And I don't want to just focus this video on whether characters are reliant on Farina, so I think that's enough about Farina. Another one of Neuvillette's advantages is that you can just use him as the last slot in a 3-unit core that doesn't rely on you doing normal attacks. Stuff like Hyper Bloom. And it'll still be pretty strong. Next up, I want to talk about Mawika. Oh, actually, wait. Before I do that. When it comes to Neuvillette, the main reason why he doesn't tend to be played in Vape teams too much is because there's a decent portion of his damage that is not reactable. When you look at the elemental application from his charge attack, it's not entirely consistent because the second charge attack shares ICD with the first one, so it won't always be the exact same hits that are reacting, but you'll generally Vape, or just react in general, either 3 or 4 hits per charge attack. By default, you'll vape the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 8th hit. But obviously, because the 7th and 8th hit happen immediately one after another, often the 8th hit will be hitting an enemy that doesn't have an aura on them, and therefore it won't react. What that means is that in the best case scenario, you get 4 out of 8 hits reacted, which is half of his damage. But in a realistic case scenario, it's generally 3 out of 8 instead of 4, which is, well, less than 40% of his base motion value. It goes a little bit higher than that because you can also vape his skill and burst. But a character that can only vape about half of their base motion value is going to be a character that's not that reliant on those transformative reactions. Right? If you look at the amount of damage that you gain from reactions, right? So, percentage of damage reacted. Right? About 50% for Neuvillette in the best case scenario. Well, it could technically be a little bit more than that if you actually manage to reliably get 4 hits of the charge attack vape, but it's kind of finicky to do that. So generally 50%. When you're playing a character in a reaction team, you're gonna build EM, right? So you're not just gonna get double damage from vape, you're gonna get double damage, and then you're gonna get EM multiplied damage. The thing is, that EM isn't something that you get for free. It's something that you get generally at the cost of other stats. You might have a little bit of EM just for free, right? Like, for example, if you're using Sacrificial Jade, you have 40 to 80 EM just for free. If you just have EM rolls on your artifacts that you didn't go out of your way to get, you also get those for free. But generally, the increase from the EM multiplier, if you want to compare a reaction team to a non-reaction team, you have to assume that if you have a reasonable amount of EM, your other stats are going to be a little bit lower to make up for that. And because of that, I'm going to assume a relatively low amount of EM for this, for now at least. So, EM, for now, let's take a look at around 100. I wonder how much I have right now, just from random substats. I have 21. Yeah. I'd have 100 if I had Sac Jade. At R5. Cool. Yeah, multiplier in multiplicative reactions is going to be this. So we have the increase on a on a 1.5x reaction and increase on a 2x reaction. Equal to 1 minus this plus this times 0.5 times multiplier. Does that make sense? It does. No, it does, yeah. I guess -1. So, the existence of the reaction in your team, because in this case we're doing Vape Neuvillette, is going to increase Neuvillette's output by about 70%. The reason why Vape Neuvillette isn't that popular outside of speedrunning is because an increase of 70% in overall damage is good. However, one, well, you're sacrificing a team slot for that, right? Other characters, if you were to use them instead, would also potentially increase your team's damage. Two, setups for Vape Neuvillette teams tend to be longer and more difficult, which means that this 70% damage increase is coming at an additional cost. Let's compare this to a character that benefits the most from reactions, right? So we've taken a look at Neuvillette, which is a character that benefits okay-ish from reactions. From multiple reactions. Let's take a look at Gaming. Gaming vapes 100% of his damage. On top of that, Gaming is a character who, because he vapes all of his damage, or because he melts all of his damage, or vapes all of his damage, actually wants to build a lot of EM. You'll often have Gaming at around 300 to 400 EM. You can check how much mine has. Mine has 400 on Meld Flower. I guess it's 500 with the effect. But he should be on Serpent Spine, so around 300. For now, let's take a look at that. 300 EM. And then he's on Crimson Witch. But obviously here, this EM is coming at a higher cost, because here we're using an EM sense. If we're using an EM sense, it means we're losing out on an attack sense. And that means that our attack is going to be lower, so this EM multiplier is going to also have to be... We're going to add an attack multiplier, which is basically just, or I guess, stat multiplier. Which is just how much our stat gets reduced from the fact that we are using an EM sense instead of an attack sense. So in Neuvillette's case, we weren't using an EM sense, so this stays 100%. But in Gaming's case, we lose 46.6% attack, right, from a sense. So we're gaining about 200 EM. So we're losing about 46% attack, about 50% attack. A Gaming in a properly fully built team during his uptime is gonna have a lot of attack buffs. Alright, so I'm on, what, 1487? We can use my Gaming as an example, right? So 1487 plus 811 times 1 plus times. So if we had an attack sense, we'd have to add that. Noblesse, Pyro Resonance, PDDS. And then Bennett. And if we lost that attack sense, we'd end up with around 90% of our attacks. So our attack percent would be around 10% lower. But still, you can see the amount of damage that we're gaining from those reactions on Gaming. It's triple. Right? Even when you take into account the stat reduction from building less attack because you want to build more EM, Gaming's damage is still fucking tripling from Melt, or more than doubling from Vape. Right, so this is what I'm trying to get at here is that certain characters benefit a lot more from having access to reactions than others do. The higher the portion of their damage they're reacting, the nature of the multiplicative reaction they have access to, whether it's a 1.5 times a reverse reaction or a 2 times forward reaction, how much EM they can easily build, what sets they have access to, like Crimson Witch, all of these things are going to potentially significantly impact the reliance of different characters on those reactions. And that's going to have a pretty big impact on what teams are good with them. The reason why Xiangling is an okay character for Neuvillette, but not an incredible one, is because Neuvillette is not a character that gains that much from those reactions. He gains something, and that something that he gains is good, and it's great in speedruns, but he doesn't gain a lot. And that's why Neuvillette's non-reaction teams, or again, it's not that they don't do reactions, but for the purposes of Hydro, Cryo, and Pyro characters going forwards, when I say non-reaction teams, I'm not saying you don't trigger reactions, I'm saying you're not triggering Vapor Melt. Neuvillette is just not that reliant on them, because the amount of damage that he gains from being able to Vape from Xiangling is good, but the amount of damage that he gains from being paired with Farina, especially when you consider Farina's personal damage, is also good. And that's why he has more flexibility. That's why he has a lot of different teams that are good. It's because he doesn't have any given unit that gives him, like, significantly more than anyone else. Because while the Vape stuff is not that favorable for him compared to other reaction carries, but at the same time, it's still 70%. Like, that's still nothing to scoff at. Like, it's still pretty good. And because Farina prevents you from being able to have access to this, right? Because Farina's off-field Hydro application makes it so it's going to be really difficult, if at all possible, to get Vapes on Neuvillette. It means that even though he has great synergy with Farina, the synergy he has with other alternatives is also good, and it makes him less reliant on her. Anyways, that's enough about Neuvillette. I don't want this whole thing to be about Neuvillette, and I think we've yapped about him enough. Let's talk about Mawiko properly now. So, Mawiko is a character who also has access to the ability to react a lot of her damage. As you may already be aware, because I've talked about Mawiko combos quite a bit, Mawiko has a bunch of different combos you can do, and the variations in combos come from the ways in which you can effectively react a larger portion of your damage. In her best case scenario, you will react your burst initial hit, as well as a good portion of your charge attacks that happen during the 7 seconds of burst duration you have. In Melt teams, because the 2 times side reaction of Pyro onto Cryo, of forward Melt, always wipes the Cryo aura. And because we don't have great off-field Cryo applicators that apply really quickly, her best combos tend to have a bit less total motion value, total multipliers, than her best Vape combos. Because you kind of have to intentionally slow yourself down a little bit in order to not lose your Cryo aura on enemies. Same reason why Neuvillette's last hit of his first charge attack, the 8th hit, often won't vape in vape teams because it hits right after the 7th hit. So you'd need to reapply pyro between the 7th and 8th hit in order to get it to vape. Which is possible, but often difficult to do reliably. Anyways, generally, Maoika's reacting her burst initial hit, so let's take a look at the numbers on it, right? So we have 800. Have I not leveled this yet? Oh. Alright. 800.6 plus 200 times 2.9. Reactable, non-reactable. Then the charge attack hits are hitting for 195.5 plus 200 times 1.02. You get 2 of them. And then you get 2 melted final hits as well, which is 272. Now, I'm cheating a little bit here because technically some of your buffs run out by the last hits. So just looking at the motion value is kind of cheating. But it'll get close enough, and we're not doing an exact calc. We're just trying to showcase a point. Anyways, and then you'll also have another 4 charge attacks that are not reactable. And then you'll also have all the off-field E-hits. But the off-field E-hits happen when you have a lot less buffs. So just counting it entirely is not a good way to do it. We're just going to assume that they are doing about half damage because you have about half the stats. Again, this is an approximation. It's far from a perfect one, but that's fine for now. Anyways, which brings Maoika's percentage of reactable damage at about 53%, a little bit over 50%. Let's say 55-ish. Unlike Neuvillette, getting those reactions is reliable. It's something you can properly do reliably, and so it's a lot easier to convince yourself to build EM. On top of that, Maoika has access to a lot more attack buffs than Neuvillette has access to HP buffs, which means that sacrificing the attack stance is also less of a sacrifice for her than it is for Neuvillette. It is still a sacrifice, so we're still gonna have to reduce our stat multiplier by about the same as Gaming. But in any case, the amount of damage that you get from your reaction is basically about double on Maoika. It's not nearly as much as what you get on a character like Gaming, who can actually react all of his damage. But it's nothing to scoff at. And the biggest reason why Maoika is a character that is more reliant on reactions than Neuvillette. Yes, obviously this 90% is bigger than 70%. But also, and more importantly, there's 2 additional factors. One, what I've already mentioned. It's easier to get your reactions out of Mawika and actually get this than it is to get this on Neuvillette. But 2, when it comes to Neuvillette teams, the only Pyro character that can actually keep up with him is Xiangling. And when you play Xiangling in a team with Neuvillette, you won't get pretty much any buffs on Xiangling. So her personal damage is going to be really low. So this 70% increased Neuvillette damage is pretty much all you get. I guess technically there's also the additional stack, so it's more like 100-ish %. With Mawika, on the other hand, well, you're playing Citlali. Citlali has okay-ish personal damage, but also a lot of buffs. She has a res shred debuff, a massive attack percent steroid with TTDS, and a massive damage percent steroid with Cinder City. When it comes to looking at what other teams are viable for a character, it's generally a matter of comparing this number, right? The increase you get from the reaction, paired with the increase you get from the character that's enabling that reaction and what they do with their own kit, versus the increase you get from different characters. And so, I want to compare it to Arlecchino. Now, Arlecchino can react about 1/3 of her damage. And, by the way, this number, right, this doesn't actually mean that when you're triggering reactions, half of your damage is coming from reacted damage and half isn't. Because it means that half of the motion value is coming from it. In other words, if I vape, if I get a melt or a vape on every 3rd attack on Arlecchino, the number that I'd put here is 1/3. But obviously, 1/3 of those attacks is reacting, and those reactions do more damage, so it represents more than 1/3 of the damage. But I'm accounting for that in the calculations. Anyways, Arlecchino, much like Mawika, or sorry, much like Neuvillette, or I guess not much. Arlecchino has access to the ability to react a much smaller portion of her damage than a lot of the other reaction carries. And so, in a lot of situations, you won't build her on an EM sense. You can, if you don't have a lot of EM in your substats, and, like, no EM buffs on the team. EM sense can actually be slightly better, but it won't be that big of a difference. And as you can see on Arlecchino, the actual damage that you get from those reactions is much smaller than a lot of the other reaction carries. Which is why, unlike Mawika, Arlecchino is a character who has very competitive non-reaction teams. When you look at Mawika's team's performance, there's like the Melt team with Citlali at the top, and then there's a pretty big gap for the next one, which is like Vape teams with Shiloden, and then another pretty big gap, and then you have the non-reaction teams. Or the reaction teams that use cope fucking units like Kachina. But when it comes to Arlecchino, because the amount of damage that she gains from the reactions themselves is much smaller, it means that if a unit that doesn't enable reactions offers enough other things, if they offer enough damage or buffs or debuffs to make up for lower damage, then those teams can be competitive with the reaction teams. Now, with the release of Citlali, Arlecchino's best team is now a reaction team. Mainly just because Citlali is kind of just too many stats. But her non-reaction teams are still not that far behind. So when it comes to Arlecchino, you generally want to go for either a Melt, a Vape, a Chevreuse, or a Monopyro team. Don't try to do some fucking weird virgin bullshit. Don't do that to yourself. But the main reason why the Mel teams are currently the best is just because Citlali is a very strong unit. Which means that future unit releases could make Monopyro Arlecchino's best team, or Chevreuse Arlecchino's best team, or even Vape Arlecchino's best team. I don't see them releasing a unit as strong as Citlali for a while, though. So I don't know how long it'll take, but anyways, Arlecchino's probably the carry that's like the least reliant on any specific support. The only support that you could make a strong argument she's actually reliant on is Bennett, and even then, she has very playable non-Bennett teams. They're not as good, but they're still fairly strong. And then when it comes to teams like from here, you have a bunch of options, a lot of which don't require specific 5-star units, right? Chevreuse Fischl is a very powerful team for Arlecchino. This is one of her best teams. Generally, when I'm looking at best possible Arlecchino team for a given situation, it's either going to be Citlali with either Chilonen, Sucrose, or Kazuha, or it's going to be a Chevreuse team. There are situations where the Chevreuse teams perform better because of how flexible rotations are in teams like this, because you're not reliant on a given reaction happening in a specific order. Malika, on the other hand, is a lot more stuck to the Melt and Vape teams. Not that her Monopyro and Chevreuse teams aren't good, but they are significantly worse. Anyways, honestly, we've yapped enough about the strongest carries, and while I do think they're the ones that are the most important to mention because they're going to be the characters that the most people want to know about, they're not the only ones that matter. So let's start talking about some other characters. First off, let's talk about Chasca. Actually, we can do units in like reverse release order. I think that's what I want to do. Alright. Here, let's talk about Chasca. Chasca is a really interesting unit because there's RNG involved in her damage because you can't control the order of your bullets when you charge. Generally, ideally, Chasca wants to properly react either with a Melt or a Vape. But because you can't reliably get a given bullet type on a given slot, it can be difficult to guarantee reactions on her. Well, you're guaranteed that you'll get some reactions, but you're not guaranteed that you'll get the ones you want. Because of that, and because of the fact that even in the best case scenario, at the very, very best, 2 of her bullets can react out of upwards of 4 bullets that deal actual damage, and then another 2 bullets that fucking tickle. It means that in the very, very best case scenario, you'll only get a bit less than half of your damage reacted. But in practice, often it's closer to a fourth of your damage. That means Chasca's a lot less reliant on reactions. The problem is, she kind of doesn't have that many great teammates that aren't reaction focused. A lot of the characters that offer Chasca, 1, actual bullets. That's very important for Chasca. Playing Dendro, Anemo, or Geo characters on Chasca is shooting yourself in the foot, right? So 1, actual bullets. 2, relevant buffs and or damage. Like, most of those characters are either Pyro, Hydro, or Cryo, or Electro. But the Electro characters can be played in reaction teams because Electro and Hydro interact favorably with one another. Basically, Chasca is a character who isn't really that reliant on transformative or on multiplicative reactions, but she's often played in teams that have them just because the characters that work well with her are characters that enable them. So Bennett, Xiangling, Farina, Citlali, I don't have Shenhe, but Shenhe, Mawika, Auron. Those tend to be the very good teammates. Pretty much the only thing I advise against is trying to make Pyro plus Electro plus Cryo work. At that point, you're kind of burning down the kitchen. But pretty much any other combination, even if it's a combination that doesn't really have reactions or multiplicative reactions, it kind of works. Like, yes, the best teams with Chasca are ones that use either Farina or Citlali, but even if you don't have those characters, the Chasca teams still tend to be strong enough. And Chasca is a character who very much has room for support design in the future to take her in a direction other than reactions, or other than at least multiplicative reactions. Like, they could design more Electro, or Electro charge focused Hydros, or they could design some superconduct bullshit that's supposed to work with Chasca. They could. They could. They could. Or freeze. She's a character that just has a lot of flexibility because she's not really reliant on anything outside of just getting her bullets. So she's a character that could potentially function in a lot of different archetypes. If this little color right here was red or purple, she'd be great in Traverse teams. But yeah. Unfortunately, that's not an option. Alright, next is Kinich. If you've tuned into my stream lately, you know I've turned into a dedicated Kinich hater. I got really annoyed with his gameplay, and I don't like him very much anymore. But let's put that aside for now. Kinich is a character that's very explicitly designed around power-related reactions. And so that's where you want to play him. He can be played in stuff that doesn't have power reactions, but he's a lot weaker, and he tends to just be a shitty version of Alhaitham if that's how you're playing him. So I wouldn't really recommend it. But it is still playable. If you like Kinich and you don't have the supports that work well with him in his pyro reaction-related teams, or you are using them on the other side, and you still want to play Kinich, he is still playable in teams that don't trigger power reactions. If you really want to force him in there, he can work. He's strong enough that he's still gonna work. Anyways, when it comes to the power reaction related teams, it's mainly just either exclusively burning or burgeon teams. The advantage that burning has is that, well, if you look at the reason why he's supposed to be good in burning and burgeon, it's because of this, right? And yeah, it's because of this. When enemies are affected by burning or they take burgeon damage, it helps him generate a lot more Night Soul points. In burning, you prog this off cooldown, so you generate a lot from the burning. In burgeon, you only proc burgeon damage when you trigger burgeon, and that won't necessarily line up well with the cooldown. You won't get it every 0.8 seconds like you do in burning. And so generally, burgeon teams tend to generate less Night Soul points. In exchange for that, they also tend to have access to stronger units. Burning teams generally are going to be ones where you use Kinich, Emily, Bennett, and then another slot here. Generally a pyro unit, but doesn't even necessarily have to be. You can also use a character like Zhongli if you really want. But the unfortunate reality is that you don't have a great last slot here. Malika has made this core much better, but obviously Malika's value in teams where you don't trigger a reaction on her burst, where you aren't using her on Codex, and where you generate a bit less fighting spirit because of slightly less total Night Soul point generation. Tends to be a bit lower. And then on top of that, Kinich's uptime is fairly long. And even without having a character you need to swap into after Bennett, his uptime tends to expire around the end of Bennett buff. Which means that if you have to add other characters in between Bennett and him, like you kind of do with Malika, it means that you're making it so that some of his uptime is going to go over Bennett's buff, and that's gonna hurt his personal damage a bit. Does that mean that this team is bad? No, not at all. This is still the best Kinich team, generally. But the point I'm making here is the units he has access to in these burning teams aren't units that necessarily synergize well with him. They're units that are just good in general, right? Bennett's Circle tends to be annoying with Kinich, and Malika's reliance on her own damage to be very powerful means that you eat into your buff uptime for Kinich. The units you can play in his other teams, though, when you're not trying to do burning, you can do something like this. And in a team like this, you have much better synergy. You have much better... Furina allows Mawika's Vape, or Mawika's Burst to react, which is a massive deal because it does a lot of damage. And Furina's also a character that isn't reliant on getting Venom buff. You can also do the same with channeling instead of Mawika. But in exchange for that, you get a lot less Night Soul point generation, because you're triggering a lot less Virgins. And you can also use a different Hydro unit here. You could use Yelan or Singto. While his burning teams tend to be the ones that perform the best, in my experience, unless you have Constellations or Signature Weapons on Kinich, there's not that much of a difference between the clear times of his burning teams versus his quote-unquote Burgeon teams that aren't really Burgeon, they're just burning teams with Furina, kind of. Just because the units you're using with him are stronger and have better synergy with one another, even if you're losing out on Night Soul point generation. You can also play him in an actual dedicated Burgeon team with something like Toma, but those tend to be a decent amount weaker. Next up, we have Mualani. Mualani has one good archetype with a bunch of different variations to it. Mualani is like Gumming in the sense that she reacts all of her damage. And obviously, that means that... And she reacts all of her damage, and she does on a 2x side reaction with forward Vape. And that means that her reliance on triggering these reactions is really, really high. Are there Mualani teams that don't trigger reactions that are viable? Yes. Because the Hydro units tend to be very strong, and they're strong enough that even if Mualani's not really doing that much, you can still kind of get over content. But her reaction teams are much better. When it comes to Mualani teams, you really need to make sure that you have enough pyro applications so that you can vape all of her hits. She doesn't have a lot of hits, right? In most situations, she only has 4 hits per rotation. That means that it could be theoretically possible to vape all of Mualani's damage with only 4 instances of pyro application. The pyro application requirements for her tend to be relatively low. But that also means that you have a little bit of flexibility when it comes to those requirements. You can potentially, if you have enough pyro application, pair her with other characters that could usually yoink some of your application. So the most straightforward way of making sure that you don't lose reactions on Mualani is to play her with a fast off-field pyro. If you're playing this, you will never miss a Vape while Pyronado is active. If you do something went terribly wrong. And then past that, what you want is characters that don't prevent you from getting that reaction. right? So generally that's going to be either buff characters or off-field damage dealers that don't steal your reactions. So buff characters like Shilonen, like Kazuha, like Sucrose. Or just damage buffing characters. Or sorry, or just damage characters that don't interfere with your aura. Like Emily. Now he does kind of a mix of both. Albedo and or Chiori. Although, if you're playing both of them, you might run into some issues. When you trigger Crystallize with a Geo unit, with a 1U Crystallize hit, it will only remove 0.5U Pyro. In other words, Crystallize isn't enough to remove the Pyro from Pyronado, but if you trigger 2 of them at the same time, it will be. So just want to show it properly. Right, we still have... Oh my god, I fucking took too long. It's annoying because they move a lot. Right, so we still have a little bit of Pyro left that we can use as our reaction trigger.
Nice and spicy.
However, if we do this, we don't. If we hit with Shilonen's E and Albedo's E at the same time, it's gone. Which I don't know if that was a good showcase of it. Try it again with this. I fucked up. Whatever. Yeah, I definitely fucked that up. Oh my god. Yeah, whatever. I don't give a shit. So if you have 2 sources of off-field Geo, you might end up losing your aura. In any case, if those are the characters you're using, if you're using off-field damage dealers that don't interfere much with your aura, or buffers that don't interfere with it at all, you will be able to get away with using, honestly, most of the Pyro characters as your off-field application. At least the ones that have off-field app, right? You'll be able to use Mawika, you'll be able to use Xinyan if you manage to keep her shield alive, you'll be able to use Toma, you'll be able to use Dea. I think you can even use Yoimiya. I'm not sure about that one though. Yoimiya one is a little more scuffed. However, if the Pyro you're using is one that has really fast Pyro, like Xiangling, it opens up additional options. Mainly, it opens up the options of either using characters that can interfere with your aura but generally won't be too bad, like Citlali, or characters that very much will interfere with your aura, but where it'll still be possible to get your vapes if you time your stuff properly, like Farina. Because things tend to be relatively inconsistent with these teams, not necessarily the best Mualani teams, but they are going to be some strong ones if that's the Mualani team you want to do. Does this mean that the only way you can play these Mualani teams with characters like Citlali, Farina, I guess Yelan as well, or Candace, is by using Channeling? What if I don't like Channeling? Well, you have another option with that, and that's using a slower Pyro, but finding a way to keep the Pyro aura alive, or at least prevent different auras from being applied to enemies, which is through the use of Dendro. Burning auras are kind of complicated, but all you really need to know for now is that when you apply Dendro to an enemy that has Pyro, or Pyro to an enemy that has Dendro, they start burning, and what's happening in the background is you have a burning aura on the enemy, a Pyro aura on the enemy, and a Dendro aura on the enemy. The Pyro aura is going to just function the same way that it usually does, but the burning and the Dendro aura are going to function differently. The Dendro aura is pretty easy to understand. It effectively just means, it's effectively working like firewood does when you burn wood. Usually the Dendro aura lasts for 9.5 to 12 seconds, depending on your app-ish. But burning quickly consumes the aura. And once there's no Dendro left to burn, the enemy stops burning. That's pretty straightforward. And as long as the enemy is, or has that underlying Dendro aura, there's also going to be a burning aura, which is kind of like the heat that the fire is giving off. And that burning aura is stronger than the default Pyro aura. It's a 2U burning aura that doesn't suffer from tax. Now, what the fuck is tax? Oh boy. Are we getting into gauge theory? I guess we are. When you apply an element to an enemy that doesn't have an element on them, that element becomes an aura on them. If I apply Pyro to an enemy, it will gain a Pyro aura that I can then use to trigger a Pyro-related reaction. However, not all of the element I applied becomes aura. There's a 20% tax on elemental application, where if I apply 1 unit of Pyro, only 0.8 units of Pyro actually make it onto the aura. If I apply 2 units, only 1.6 makes it into the aura. Let me see if I can properly showcase the impact of that. In order to do that, I need an off-field 2U, which is Amber. Oh boy, this is gonna be cringe, isn't it? I forgot when you need to swap. Okay. When I need to check the timer on the explosion. It explodes at like 3 point something. So I wanna swap in Chongyun when my timer hits 4 seconds. Every melt reaction I trigger with Chongyun's burst is going to remove 0.5 units of Pyro on the enemy. What that means is that if I apply 2 units of Pyro, like Baron Bunny can, I should be able to react all 4 hits of Chongyun's burst. You get a 4th hit from one of the constellations. But aura also decays over time. So if I wait a little bit too long, that 1.6 post-tax aura is going to become 1.5, and then that's only enough for 3 reactions. as you can see, right, the ones that were actually in the middle that got hit, they didn't end up with a cryo aura at the end because we melted all 4 of the hits. However, if instead of applying pyro off field like that, or actually no, we can do the exact same thing here. We don't even need to do it with Bennett. If we just wait a tiny little bit longer, so this time, instead of like preemptively swapping into Chongyun, we're just gonna swap into Chongyun after Baron Bunny explodes. We got a cryo aura, and that means that our 4th hit didn't melt this time. Because the amount of time that it takes for 1.6 U of pyro to decay into 1.5 is very short. The burning aura doesn't suffer from tax and doesn't decay. It's 2 units of burning, which behaves like 2 units of pyro. What that means is that the burning aura can sustain up to 3 melt reactions and still allow for you to have pyro for your vape. In other words, adding a Dendro unit with a slow pyro applicator in a Mualani team is going to make it so that your last slot can very easily be a cryo unit that's going to apply a bunch of cryo, and it still can end up not messing up your reactions. On top of that, once you don't have pyro on the enemy anymore, once Mavika's kill expires, you reapply your Dendro, you reapply your cryo, and both of those auras can exist at the same time on the enemy. Which means you also get to melt a hit. So in these teams, you can do something like this. Oh, I didn't crit. That's fucked up. Right, she's not on Serpent Spine anymore. My crit rate's probably too low. Shouldn't have done that, but whatever. It's hard to show properly on a multi-wave thing. Let me put Mawika back on Serpent Spine so she actually crits on all 3 of them. Surely we don't get unlucky, right? 88% crit rate. But we need to crit on 3 of them. It'll be fine. Yeah. Here we have to swap back to Nahida just because it's multi-wave stuff. But as you can see, even though we have Sitlali's thing going, we still don't struggle to get reactions on all of our reactable hits. And we end, again, same way. Nahida's not the only unit that works here. You can also use Emily. I haven't done much testing on other Dendro units because the other Dendro units don't provide as much overall value as Nahida's EM buff and Emily's damage. But other Dendro units should function as well, if this is what you want to do. Kole works in Kura C4 as well, that makes sense. Anyways, Mualani is a character that only has one archetype, which is Vape, but there's a lot of flexibility in which units you can use in that archetype. Not only does she have access to a very powerful team with only 4-star supports, right? If you look at Sucrose, Shanling, and then Candace or Kachina, that is honestly not that much worse than her premium teams, but it does tend to be harder to play. But she also has access to a lot of different synergies with a lot of the popular 5-star units. You can play her with Citlali, Nahida, Emily. You can play her with Farina, Shilonen, Kazuha. You can play her with Citlali, Mawika. You've got a bunch of options in there. But it's pretty much always Vape. Anyways, next up, we can talk about Cloyne. Cloyne is a really interesting character, because she has effectively an artificial anti-synergy. Her kit has a cap on her stat scaling. If you look at her motion value, I guess if you actually play Cloyne, you'll crown her, so we should look at talent level 10 motion values. Right, 49.6 times 3. Plus... which one is it? 76.7 times 3. And then this is 60% times 6. Alright, so burst aside, she has about as much damage coming from her talents as she does from her Ascension passive. But this Ascension passive stops increasing in damage when your attack goes past 3,000. In other words, if you get more attack than 3,000, attack becomes about half as effective. Which is kind of just an overcomplicated way of saying that she doesn't like stacking a lot of attack nearly as much as other attack scalers. That means that teams that focus on hyper buffing her tend to be a lot worse. However, that also means that Leo, I don't think it actually matters very much which way you do it. Anyways, yeah. Alternatively, it means that she has comparatively better synergy with teams that don't focus as much on her personal damage. Or, rather, teams that increase your damage through buffs other than just stacking a lot of attack on her. But yeah. That means that Clara has access to a lot of different archetypes. Mainly, her two most popular archetypes are Aggravate and Overload. But because she doesn't have great synergy with Bennett, and because she has a pretty high amount of motion value, and therefore the damage she gains from Aggravate is comparatively lower than other Electro units, because she already has a lot of damage to begin with, it means that neither of those archetypes are actually that amazing synergy-wise with her. She's a unit that's intentionally designed to not have any, like, partners that work that perfectly with her. And in exchange for that, she gets higher numbers. Right? Which is, I think, a relatively... or a very interesting idea for a character. And I like it a lot. They effectively intentionally gimp her synergy with a lot of stuff in order to allow for her to have higher numbers while remaining balanced. But I think it's cool. I think that's really cool. Anyways. Because she has those higher numbers, but no synergy with any given specific type of team, it means that you have a lot more flexibility in your team building. Clyde is a character that's viable in pretty much every Abyss, because if one of her teams is not that great for an Abyss, generally at least one of the other ones will be pretty good. You mostly end up playing her in teams with Fischl. The rest of the team can either be something focused on Aggravate, where you can use something like Nahida Shilonen, but your Dendro slot in a team like this is quite flexible. You can use a defensive focused one instead. And then, instead of Shilonen, you can also use pretty much any of the Animo units. Chlorine's uptime doesn't tend to be that long, so her synergy with the Animo units isn't particularly bad. Other than Hyperloom, you can also do... other than Aggravate, you can also do some Hyperloom focused teams. You can do it with Farina, but you don't have to. You can also do it with some of the other Hydro units. You can use it. You can do it with Singso. You can do it with Yulan. You can even do double Hydro if you want. But that's a little bit more questionable. You can do Overload teams with Shoulders. These teams tend to really appreciate having another Pyro unit in the last slot. Because otherwise it's hard to maintain good uptime on Shoulders' Resistance Shred. So most of the time that other unit is going to be either Xiangling or Maoika. This is like the default 4-star version of the Overload Florence team. In Overload, Fischl doesn't get a lot of A4 procs because Chlorine's Electro Up is pretty fast, so Fischl won't be, or Chlorine won't be trigger for that many of the overload reactions, which means less Ascension 4 procs on Fischl. And you're not getting Aggravate, which also hurts Fischl's damage. And that means that while Fischl is a great partner with her, there's not nearly as much synergy in here as there is in the Aggravate teams, which means that you can more easily justify using different units. You can use Auroron if you're using Mawika, or you can use Sarah. I'm a massive Sarah hater, but she is fairly good in Chlorine teams. Although I really wouldn't recommend Sarah if you don't have her C6. And the rotations tend to be harder to do. Outside of that, you can also use her in some more or less cohesive teams. Where you don't have like a specific overarching theme to the team, right? Like electrocharge teams or like taser teams, whatever. With something like this, use Farina. Auroron is obviously pretty solid in these teams. But you can also just use Fischl. And they're all, honestly, fairly solid Chlorine teams. None of them are, like, all that bad. So, you have a lot of flexibility with your team building. If you really want to, you can also just do some weird fucking bullshit like this. But yeah, meh. I don't recommend it. Generally, Bennett is just not the greatest in her teams. Isn't that too much attack? It's too much attack for her Ascension passive. Attack still increases her damage past 3,000. It just only increases the talent portion of it, which is only about half of her motion value. Yeah, you can also do some other fucking cope shit, like double Geo with Yunjin or Chiori or Albedo. It works. It's fine. It's honestly hard to make a Chlorine team that isn't functional. But yeah. Alright. Next up, let's talk about Gaming. Gaming was the character I used earlier as an example of the one that benefits the most from reactions. And there's a fucking reason for that. Gaming benefits a lot from reactions. He is the most reaction-reliant character in the game, most likely. Actually, that's not necessarily true. The teams that, or the units that non-reaction pyro archetypes have access to do a bit more lifting by themselves than non-reaction Hydro. So I guess Mualani might be more reliant than he is on reactions. But he's up there as one of the most reaction-reliant units in the game. You can play non-reaction Gaming, and honestly, like I said, because your base archetypes are like so strong, you'll probably be able to clear stuff anyways with something like this. Or something like this. But don't do that to yourself, please. Don't do that to yourself. Other than that, his best teams are obviously Vape and Melt. Unlike Mualani, he actually gets to choose between the two reactions, right? Obviously, you can't do a Melt team with a Hydro unit. You can't do a reverse reaction team with a Hydro unit. So what can Gaming do? What are his options, right? So he can either go for a Melt team or a Vape team. Units that like buff his damage regardless of reactions are obviously Bennett, Shilonen, the VV units, so Kazuha, Sucrose, all that. Xianyun. And then there's the reaction appliers that also buff him, which are Farina and Citlali. And then there's the reaction enablers that buff him. And then there's the reaction enablers that don't buff him or that buff him by a relatively small amount, like Yelan, Xingqiu, Rosaria, I guess Kaya, Iona, kind of. But yeah, when it comes to Melt, Citlali is like a really big deal because she just offers a lot. The value that she provides is just really, really too much to ignore. It's so many stats on top of enabling Melt, and because Gaming reacts all of his damage, the difference between Melt and Vape at a baseline is also pretty big. But if you're using Citlali, if you're doing a Melt team, it limits the amount of plunges you can do, and it means you can't really do damage outside of your plunges. The main advantage that Vape teams have with Gaming is that the Hydro applications apply the Hydro appliers apply Hydro faster, and Hydro allows, because of the reverse side reaction consuming less aura, for up to 2 reactions per Hydro application instead of 1. That means you can potentially use more plunges. You can do the Gaming Juggle Tech to get a higher total amount of plunges. And if you're using Xianyun, you can do normal plunges, not just E plunges. And if you're using Bennett, you can also use normal attacks that are going to be Pyro infused. Now, the Melt teams are still better. They're honestly a decent amount better. But the Vape teams tend to have more damage that's coming from a different unit than Gaming, which tends to make them feel relatively similar in multi-wave content and other sort of content that can tend to be cringe for Gaming himself. When it comes to Melt, all you need is either Citlali or Rosaria, and that's enough application to melt all of your relevant hits. And then you want either you just want to add characters that buff. Right? So either one of these two. And then you want characters that buff. So obviously Bennett, huge buff. Xianyun, huge buff. Shilonen, big buff. But there's also some other options that you might not be thinking about that are also good additions. So for example, Diona. Diona C6 gives 200 EM, which is a fairly big amount of stats. But also, it's the second cryo unit. Now, because Gumming can melt all of his damage, it also means that every single time he deals damage in a melt team, he's hitting an enemy affected by cryo. Cryo Resonance doesn't buff the crit rate of cryo attacks, it buffs the crit rate of attacks on enemies that have cryo on them, which means it does work on melt. And so Diona here in the slot isn't just 200 EM, she's 200 EM, energy for Citlali, and 15% crit rate, which is actually pretty good. You can also use Rosaria instead, but then that starts becoming a lot of crit rate, which makes it hard to not to overcap your stuff. And then when it comes to Hydro teams, generally the Hydro teams that don't use Farina don't tend to be the best. While the Citlali meld teams are Gumming's best teams for sure, if you don't have Citlali and you end up playing a Rosaria instead, you might encounter some cringe situations, but you can still get good clears. The Vape teams that don't have Farina, on the other hand, are a little bit more scuffed. So with Farina, I tend to like double Hydro a lot more, especially now that Citlali's out. If you're playing a Vape Gumming team when you have Citlali, it's probably just because it's more chill to play and it's less setup reliant. And then you'd obviously rather have teams where it's hard to fuck up, which is going to be teams like this with either Shilonen, Xianyun, or Bennett on the last slot. Next carry! Navia. Where is she? Alright, I don't have her. Okay. Who's gonna be the placeholder? We're gonna pretend this is Navia, okay? When it comes to building Navia teams, you're not reliant on any sort of multiplicative reactions, obviously, but you do need to trigger Crystallize. The thing is, triggering Crystallize is actually really trivial. Navia's skill gains damage based on the amount of Crystallizes, or I guess burst hits, whatever, that you've gotten, right? Because it gains bullets from that. And it can gain up to 6 bullets, but the difference between 3 bullets and 6 bullets isn't that big. It's big and it's worth getting, but as long as you get at least 3, Navia functions as a unit. And getting 3 is actually pretty much entirely trivial. The fact that she can get up to 6 means that if there's units that are a little bit weaker or have a little bit less synergy with the rest of the team, but they allow for you to generate a bit more crystallizes, they can still be somewhat competitive. The additional 3 bullets on Navia fulfill the same function in a team as the 3rd stack on Neuvillette, where the units that synergize with the rest of the unit's kit more tend to be units that don't give you those last 3 bullets, or in Neuvillette's case, that last stack, which is going to reduce the gap between those teams that use the best synergistic unit, because it doesn't get all those bullets, or in Neuvillette's case, that last stack. With Navia, you pretty much always want to run a second Geo unit. Technically, you don't have to. Bennett channeling Farina or Bennett channeling another Hydra, whatever. And effectively just doing a national or pseudo-national team with Navia as the on-fielder is still reasonably strong. But you're not taking advantage of Navia's strengths all that much in a situation like that. So, for most people who pull Navia, that's not what I'd recommend. So most of the time, you're going to have a second Geo unit. Now, that second Geo unit, you have a few options. You can go for a defensive-focused one, like Zhongli. You can go for Xilonen, which tends to be the best second Geo. But Xilonen doesn't have off-field Geo application, which means you'll generally end up with less crystallizes. And so, while what she provides for the team is better than other Geo units, you're paying for that by getting less bullets on Navia. And because of that, the gap between the Xilonen teams and the other teams isn't that big. So what are your other options? You can use Albedo, you can use Chiori. Chiori won't get the second thing though, which is really cringe. But it is what it is. So you can use Albedo, you can use Chiori. You can use Ningguang, you can use GeoMC. I remember when Navia came out, I thought that the Geo character I preferred pairing with her the most was GeoMC. But we've got a few Geo characters released since then, so I don't really think that's the case anymore. You can use Kachina. Kachina is a fairly solid option as well. And then once you have your second Geo unit, you're left with the rest of the team. Now, in most situations, that's going to be Bennett. Bennett's really good. Attack scalers like Bennett. Bennett's kind of goated. But you don't need to use Bennett. Default stuff like Bennett Mawika is generally going to be very strong. You can use Bennett Chanling. You can use Bennett Farina. But you can also use things like Farina Yelan. Or Farina Sing Sao. Or honestly, Farina Fischl. Bennett Fischl. Generally, as long as you pick any two of the units I've mentioned on top of your Geo unit, you'll have a functional Navia team. So she's not really reliant on any specific character. And she has a decent amount of flexibility in the team building, which is nice. I'll be right back, chat. I'm back. Oh, guards. Anyways, next up, we have. Oh yeah, I forgot Xianyun. Xianyun is also a good option here. Even though Xianyun obviously won't help you with VV for Navia damage, and And what was the other thing? Doesn't help you with VV. And Navia doesn't get multiplicative reactions on the plunge. Navia's normal attacks aren't all that great, and so being able to replace them with plunge attacks, since in a lot of these teams, you kind of are forced to stay on Navia, even though you don't gain all that much from it, because you don't have many other things you could be doing, and generating more crystallizes is important. Replacing those normal attacks with plunge attacks is also a nice gain in damage. Which makes Xianyun a relevant option in those Navia teams as well. Anyways. Next up is Wriothesley. And again, it's a character I don't have, so we'll need to use a placeholder. We'll use Charlotte as a placeholder. Wriothesley is one of the most flexible characters. He's somewhat similar to Chlorinde in the sense that he has access to a lot of different archetypes because he doesn't have amazing synergy with any of them. So, let me explain why. When it comes to how crowd characters can synergize with things, you have a few things you can look at, right? Whether they can synergize with freeze, and that's generally if they have really good synergy with characters like Shenhe, or have parts of their kit that rely on the enemies not moving. That's not really the case for Wriothesley. So what else? Well, you can look at potential synergy with Meld. And that's generally going to be favorable ICD and big hitting hits. But the thing is, with Wriothesley, while he does have a potential big hitting hit on the enhanced charge attack with his Ascension 1, that only triggers when his HP goes below 60%. Which won't happen if you have a healer on the team unless you get hit. But the thing is, if you don't have a healer on your team, a lot of his combos are actually HP negative. And so you really want to have a healer on the team. Because once his HP goes below 50%, his E doesn't give him damage anymore. So basically, he's kind of being pulled in two directions at once, where you want healing, but you also don't. In practice, you're going to want to play him with healers just because the healers that you can use it with him also happen to be very strong units that you'd want to use anyways. But it does mean that he doesn't necessarily have access to a lot of value from this passive. Which means that in Melt teams, he's very gated by his ICD. His normal attacks have normal ICD, but his charge attack doesn't have ICD. Thing is, his charge attack costs 50, which is a lot of stamina. Honestly, Wriothesley would be a significantly stronger unit if his charge attack cost 25 instead of 50. Because as he is now, most of his strong normal attack and charge attack combos are stamina negative, and heavily so. Anyways, does that mean that you can't play him in melt teams? No. His melt teams are actually still fairly strong. It's just, unfortunately, you can't get the most out of his kit in those teams. But you can't really get the most out of his kit in any of his teams, anyways. So, how do you want to build those melt teams? Obviously, he's an attack scaler. Guess what? So obviously that means Bennett's going to be very good with him. But because not having a healer, especially in melt teams, means that you can potentially get more damage from this, at least. He doesn't get punished as much if you don't use Bennett. And he can have combos that aren't HP negative, as long as you're willing to accept that they will be heavily stamina negative. Because those combos are going to spam a lot more charge attacks, which is going to take a lot of stamina. His best teams right now are still generally either the melt teams or the Vape melt teams. So you can do melt teams with like an off-field pyro, like Maoika or Shanling, plus a buffer, like Shilonen or an Animo unit. Or you can use something like Farina and do a Vape melt team like this, and that's also quite strong. But he also has access to some other options. He can use Burn Melt with something like this. He can even potentially sacrifice the Bennett to go for something else. Maybe use a defensive option like Toma. Get Power Resonance, Toma defensive stuff, and normal attack damage bonus. And finally, you can also play him in teams that don't trigger melt. And while the teams tend to have slower clear times, they have different advantages. You can play him in a freeze team using like either a cryo defensive unit and then like Farina Shilonen or Shenhe Farina Shilonen, I guess. You can kind of, honestly, you can really mix and match for the freeze teams. And finally, you can do Hyper Bloom, which I stand by being the most underrated Grizzly teams. People tend to underestimate Hyper Bloom a lot. When you're playing a Hyper Fridge team, which is a Hyper Bloom team with Cryo, what you're effectively doing is you're playing a Hyper Bloom team that also keeps the enemies permanently frozen, which is pretty much as chill of a gameplay experience as it can get against freezable enemies. Now, obviously, that's not the best against bosses, but Hyper Bloom tends to have single target damage that's high enough to deal with that anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. And it's relatively low investment. So something like this tends to actually be fairly strong. You get to have all the upside from freeze without the reliance on the strong freeze units and without getting punished as hard against content that counters freeze. But obviously it doesn't tend to scale with constellations or signature weapons as well as the pure freeze teams do. You can also play in monocryo, but monocryo is like a little bit more questionable in my eyes. Anyways, next, Linny. And Linny is actually one of the characters I wanted to talk about the most here. Because Linny surprisingly has a lot of team options. He's a character that's like very clearly designed for Monopyro, right? He gains a massive amount of damage percent against enemies that have a Pyro aura on them based on the amount of Pyro characters on the team. But as it turns out, even with that, there's still some other options. The amount of damage that Linny gains against enemies that are affected by Pyro is, what is it, 60 to 100 damage percent, I think?
Assemble!
Right? Yeah. 60 to 100 damage percent. In a team where you get a good amount of damage percent, right, you guaranteed you have your goblet. You have 15% from your 2-piece Maréchal Safe, that's what you're using. You have any damage percent buffs from the rest of the team. If you're using Kazuha or an Atlan unit, you get about 40% more there. You generally start around 100%-ish by default, which means that the upwards of 100% he can gain on top of that is generally about 50% more damage. You know what else is about 50% more damage? Triggering Vape. In other words, if you end up playing him in Vape teams, the amount of damage he gains from Vape is about the same as the amount of damage he loses from not having access to that passive. In other words, Linny is a character who can be played in Vape, but when you do play him in Vape, you don't care that much who's triggering the reactions. Similarly, you can also play him in Melt teams. Obviously, though, you don't want to be playing him with characters whose main strength in those reaction teams is the speed of their application, because he's not as reliant on that. And so mainly in those teams, you'll want to be using characters like Farina or Citlali. I've said Farina and Citlali a lot today, haven't I? My goodness. Anyways, other than that, you can also just play him in default Monopyro teams. Or you can play him in Chivalrous teams as well. You pretty much always want to use Bennett with him. The teams that are the least reliant on having Bennett with him are probably the Chevreuse ones, where you can get away a little bit more easily with just Chevreuse's attack buff, but you still really want it. And you can also use just other... I haven't mentioned Emilie that much for Pyro characters yet. Emilie is effectively a pseudo-Pyro character. He's a Pyro character that does green damage. A burning team with Emilie is effectively just a Monopyro team. So anytime I've mentioned Monopyro already throughout this video, you can assume that Emilie was an option to consider there as well. Anyways, next! Alhaitham. Alhaitham is a character that has a surprising amount of synergistic archetypes. He's another one I don't have, so I'll use Kave as a placeholder. The most popular Alhaitham archetype is Hyperbloom. And he's good in Hyperbloom. It's straightforward. You can use him either as solo Dendro or with Nahida. It's hard to fuck it up. It's good. Other than that, you can also use him in Quick Bloom, which is Hyper Bloom, but with much slower Hydro, where you still get good quicken uptime on enemies. So mainly with Farina as solo Hydro. But you can also play him in other archetypes than that. You can play him in Quicken, just like actual spread, with Alhaitham, Nahida, and then Electro, and then whatever else. In those teams, Fischl doesn't tend to be that great, because in Aggravate teams, much of Fischl's value comes from her ability to trigger her Ascension 4 passive. But the trigger condition for that is your active character triggering a reaction, and spread doesn't count. Quicken counts if you trigger Quicken with the Dendro, but in order for that to happen, you need to end up with an underlying Electro, which just won't really happen when you're playing Alhaitham. And so that means that in those Quicken teams, Yai tends to be a preferable option to Fischl. It's the only time you'll hear me say that. But other than that, people tend to underestimate Alhaitham in both just Burgeon teams, where he's still alright, but more importantly in Nilo teams. Alhaitham is a pretty solid option for Nilo teams. The Alhaitham Nilo teams tend to be harder to play than the Nahida Nilo teams, but they're still strong. So that's another thing you can do with them. Next up is Wanderer. And boy. Recent characters very often have gotten, or have provided us with strong incentives to play them in teams where they're the main source of damage. And that incentive was created by them having very solid numbers and good scaling. The thing with Wanderer is that his numbers are just a bit underwhelming. And because his numbers are a bit underwhelming, it means that there's less of a difference in power between the teams where you properly use him in his intended hypercarry role versus the teams where you play units that are less synergistic but that have personal damage themselves. In other words, Wanderer has an okay amount of team flexibility just by virtue of the fact that none of his teams are that great. His best teams is going to generally have Farazan, obviously. I'll be using Hazo as a placeholder. And then you just want 2 additional units. Bennett Farina is generally going to be your best bet. But then you're playing Wanderer without a shielder, which can be a little rough. But you can also just do a mishmash of assorted off-field damage dealers, and it'll be fine. I don't think I need to say anything about Nahida and Nilo. Their teams are fairly straightforward. Sino? Man. Sino certainly is a unit of all time. The best thing that Sino has going for him is that his kit has fairly good synergy with a lot of the transformative reactions you can do. He tends to be a very good Electro on-fielder for Hyperbloom related teams, whether it be Curry teams, straight Hyperbloom, Quick Bloom stuff. But those transformative reaction teams tend to not rely that much on the power of your on-fielder. Which means that while those teams are strong, they're not that much weaker if you are using another random Electro unit instead of him. Outside of those teams, he tends to just be weaker than the other Electro carrier. Well, mainly weaker than Clyde. But obviously, if you want to play Sino, it doesn't matter how strong he is. Well, I mean, it does, but if you want to play Sino despite his strength, you don't want to listen to me just fucking tell you don't, right? Like, you probably want to know what teams you should be playing. Generally, I'd lean towards those transformative reaction teams, but you can also get away with using him in teams like Chevler's teams. And it works fine. You know what, chat? I don't think this is gonna be a good video. I feel like I got sidetracked too much. It's too yappy. Maybe take 2 tomorrow. I think the video has a good concept. More organization is gonna be good. Yeah. Maybe I could do it like all the carries of a specific element. I feel like it would be easier to have them to have a natural progression if that's what I do. Yeah. 7 free videos, true. Can't wait to talk about all the Animo carries. And all the Geo carries. You showcase how to do a rotation with Arlecchino, Candace, Bennett, Lanyan. Or... do you have, I assume you have Candace C6, because if you don't, then don't fucking play that team. But yeah, sure.
Teamwork is dreamwork. Do your worst. Hear my prayer.
Closing in.
I forgot this world. Idiot. I started without burst, which is kind of annoying. Alright. Do it again. How good is Primal Spear on Arlecchino? Can I use it instead of main weapon? I mean, if you have her signature, you'd rather use that, but it's pretty good, yeah. Anyways. So this is what the rotation is supposed to look like. If, when you swap to Lanyan, you wait until Bennett's self-pyro app happens, then your Lanyan E is going to swirl Hydro and apply Pyro, and then you normal attack and that swirls Pyro. And then Candace C6 procs, it removes the aura. You swap to Arlecchino, the swap applies Hydro. You now have a Hydro aura on the enemy. Then you charge attack but cancel it so it doesn't vape. And then you just start normal attack spam. Let's show it again. Bennett E, or sorry, Arlecchino E, Bennett Q E, Candace EQ, Arlecchino or Lanyan swap, E, normal Arlecchino, and go off. I actually wonder. With Sig, do you just start rotation with charge attack? Yeah. Yeah. You might be able to do 1 and 2C at some point instead. Let me check if you can. Cause you probably can. You can't do it at the start because the timing just doesn't line up well. But you should be able to do. Candace EQ, Lonnie on the wait, E, and 1, Arlecchino. Yeah. Although your Pyro Aura might expire after that. I'm not sure. Anyways. You guys want any other rotation showcases? Any rotations you're struggling with, chat? Mualani, Mawika, Shilon, and Sitlali? Don't play that team, man. Please. I'm begging you, don't play that team. Mawika, Sucrose, Bennett, Sitlali? Sure. So... in a team like this, the biggest potential issue that can happen is... also, let me get Fav so I don't kill the enemy. The biggest potential issue that can happen is... if you swap out of Sucrose too early, and you use your Sitlali stuff, you might have your Sitlali burst hit right before a Mawika skill hit. And if you do, you won't get proper melts. You kind of have to, like, intentionally slow yourself down a little bit. basically, if you only do one Sucrose and immediately swap out, I'll show you what happens. Wait, did I get it anyways? I think I did. Oh, whatever. Well, the exact timing stuff kind of matters a bit, but yeah. I mean, it's also going to depend on your ping. But the setup is very straightforward. Another thing you can do to make it easier is just add a normal attack on Seatlali before you swap the Mawika. It's a level 25, dude. Why am I one rotating this? Character, man. The Luke Melt team with Shanyan. It's gonna be the same thing as Gumming.
One is fast.
I think technically the best way to do it is to start with Shanyan EQ, then Bennett, and then normal attack on Shanyan. If you want to have the like best overlap on your uptime, but I can't be bothered, so I'm just gonna do this. Oh, I thought, well, it's fine. I did a little too fast there, but it's fine. Yeah, like you're probably better off doing like this. Something like this. ER Black Hole team, yup. Average Xianyun experience. It's why I swapped her to Fab, even though she doesn't really necessarily need it. Lorraine Fischl, Charlene Chevy. I'm not actually sure. Bro, the overload buffs kind of fucked over my understanding of those rotations. Where's...
Armed and ready.
Dude, I can't be bothered gearing her properly. This'll have to do, man. You probably want to do something like...
Justice will prevail. Final warning.
Out of the frying pan.
As you will.
Into the shadows.
Boba, get them.
Hunt them down.
Not sure. Maybe Guoba first? You could, yeah. Guoba first also works.
Out of the frying pan.
By royal decree. Stop right there.
Eat this.
Loaded. Time to testify.
Boba, get them. Wings of darkness.
Yeah. Is fully M channeling better in this team? Yes, 100%. The overload buffs were big, man. Let me gear her properly. Fine, I'll show you. I have the bullet already, whatever.
Final warning.
Nice and spicy. Oz, reveal thyself.
Ready.
As you wish.
Evil look. Shoot on sight.
Yeah, you're overloading for like 30k. It's just maintaining Electro Aura is kind of rough. So I'm not entirely sure what a perfect rotation looks like. Oops, wrong character.
Drop your weapons. Hunt them down.
Midnight.
You asked for it. Final.
Nice and spicy.
By royal decree.
Oops, wrong character to swap into again.
Time to testify.
Midnight vengeance.
Stop right there.
you!
Midnight fantastic.
Into the shadows.
Oh, whatever. Too much cringe. You're just using a normal crit build on Klein? Yeah. Where did Klein's damage go? I mean, yeah. My Klein build is like pretty average. $900 EM Charling, yes sir. Yes sir. That's how it should be.
Witness the power of Gowa. Rain. At the right.
Stand clear. Animal hypostasis simulation. Animal test 6308.
Wings of dark.
Stand clear.
Rain cutter. Know my sword.
Nice and split. Absorption test. Enhanced animal module 75. Absorption.
My royal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me read you a verse. Know my sword.
As you wish, main.
Stand clear. Absorption test. Animal hypostasis simulation.
Odds revealed by
Witness the power of Gowa.
Oh.
rain out.
Anyways. That's my go right there. We take a look at 1082 EM Shangling. Don't think we'll have enough ER on this one, but
Let me read you a verse.
would Kitane be better? Yeah, 100%.
Animal test 6308. Stand clear.
You're toast. Midnight fantastic.
Animal test 6308. Nice and spike. Stand clear.
Witness the power of Gowa. Rain outlines your fate. By royal
Animal test 63. Enhanced animal module 75. Absorption.
Let me read you a verse.
Animal test 63.
Know my sword.
Stand clear.
Rain cutter.
Swirl. Mark 2.
Yeah. ER is a bit too low. Maybe we can try to battery it a little more.
Let me read you a verse.
We're just a little too low on ER. We can probably get a faster clear if we swap back to ER Sands and we play better though.
By royal decree.
Rain outlines your
Absorption test.
Midnight Venom.
Animal test 6308.
ring cutter. Know my soul.
I don't think I should have bothered picking that up actually.
Stand clear. Swirl. Mark 2. Wings of dark.
Let me lead you. Rain outlines.
By royal decree. Absorption test. Animal hyperstate.
Witness power for what?
Oh no, I fucked up at the end. Aww. That should have been faster, but I fucked up. Oh well.
Ring cutter. Rain outlines.
Nice spike. Animal test 6308. Stand clear. Swirl. Mark 2. Absorption test. Midnight.
Witness power for what?
Sack mod check?
Stand clear. Animal test 6308. By royal decree.
Let me lead you abreast. Know my soul.
Spicy.
As you wish.
Wait, he didn't do the jump. No. Aw.
Absorption test.
Ring cutter. Rain outlines your
Man, I know we can get a good clear. Maybe what I should do is actually this.
Swirl. Mark 2. Animal test 6308.
Let me lead you abreast. Time to act.
It's the first wave that's kind of annoying.
Ring cutter.
Animal test 6308. Midnight fin.
Witness power for what?
Nice and spot. By royal animal hyperstasis and you'll skip. Animal test 60.
Ring cutter.
Absorption test.
That was awful, dude. My cooldowns have... Yeah. That was awful.
Odds revealed.
Let me lead you abreast.
Nice and spicy. Enhanced animal module 75. Animal test 6308.
Oh no! I fucked up. I didn't fucking... Oh my god. I don't have my pyro available. Oops.
Your
absorption test.
witness the power for what?
Animal hypostation. Eat this. Stand clear.
Know my sword. Rain outlines your rain cutter.
This ain't it. Man. I know we can get a sub 1 minute clear if we play it well enough, but it's so hard to play this team perfectly.
Know my sword. Witness the power for what? Huh?
Absorption test. Animal test.
As you wish.
Stand clear.
Rain cutter. Time to act.
Eat this. Odds repeat. Animal test 6308. Stand clear.
Witness the power.
Midnight. Absorption test. Stand clear.
No! I got fucking knocked back. It's okay. That was a much better clear. Minute and 4. If we didn't get the fucking spin, that would have been a sub 1. All right. I'm pretty happy with that. I think this team is better with fully M Shangling than with Emblem Shangling. Fucking hell, dude. That's crazy. That's actually wild. One Fab Lance away from comfortable energy. No, we have comfortable energy in this team. But if I had Kitane, I could have comfortable energy and an EM Sands. But I don't. It is what it is. Anyways, I think that's gonna be it for today. I hope you all enjoyed your stay. I hope you had a good time, pleasant experience, fun day. I don't really want to raid anyone today, so I'll just see you guys tomorrow. Bye bye.